participants use their.
All set. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the January 24th meeting of the Community Preservation Committee. I, along with Laura Dorfman, am the chair of the CPC. We are a 9-member committee and currently have 7 active members and hoping to have our final 2 in the days ahead. First tonight, I would like to take the roll. We do have at least 1 member who is participating remotely. So members of the committee, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative if you are present. Maureen Callahan. She will be participating remotely, hopefully soon. Reg Foster.
Here.
Jim Rosenbaum.
Here.
Dave Hera.
Here.
Jean McKnight.
Here.
Laura Dorfman.
Here.
And the chair is here also. Also, our administrative staff, Lauren Spinney. And Emily Achtenberg, our financial consultant. If she's not online now, she will be shortly. For this meeting, the Needham CPC is convening live and by Zoom. The link to this meeting is posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join the meeting. All supporting materials for the meeting have been provided to our committee members and are available to the public on the website. A reminder to the public, this is a public meeting, not a public hearing. Although you may want to make a statement or ask a question, the time for doing so will be at the public hearing in March. If you have a comment or a question that is of a more pressing nature, you can email it to either Lauren Spinney or Cecilia Simchak. For our committee members during the meeting tonight, to maintain some level of orderliness, please raise your hand or wait to be recognized by me. So let's move to tonight's agenda. We always try to keep our meetings to 1.5 hours, but certainly no longer than 2 hours. This is a very important agenda. We want to give it all its due time, but we do want to make sure that we are efficient during the course of the evening. So moving to our agenda. Can you pull that up?
The agenda.
Yeah. I have it here. So the committee chair introduction and update, I have nothing to add other than what we have been doing in the past weeks. Our presentation tonight is an applicant presentation, the FY 2025-01 Needham Housing Authority, Linden Chambers redevelopment. I would ask that one of our members and liaison to the Housing Authority, Reg Foster, introduce our presenters. Reg?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And might I also say, I think they're vacuuming out in the outside, so maybe you want to swing the door closed just so that the attendees, virtual attendees, can hear them better. Thank you. I'm Reg Foster. I'm chair of the Needham Housing Authority, and I'm going to introduce the presenters and participants tonight, and then turn things over to Margaret Moran. We have on my far left, far right, Margaret Moran, my other left here, Margaret Moran, who is Deputy Director of the Needham Cambridge Housing Authority, and also head of the Planning and Development Department. And then we have Mike Zajac, who is Director of Planning and Development at Cambridge. Both of them are actively involved in our project since day one, which was in mid-2021. And then I also want to introduce, we have 2 board members here tonight. We have Ed Scheidler and Penny Kirk, who is part of the support committee. And from this point, I'm just going to turn it over to Margaret to take it from here.
Sure. Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to present tonight. I'm assuming that it would be helpful for us to go through our presentation. I know folks did receive it. Is that the best course of action, or?
I think the expectation is you go through the
Okay,
presentation.
very good, very good. So just as a way of introduction, a lot of different hands and entities are really working in concert to progress the Linden project. At the heart and soul of it is the Needham Housing Authority, which has been the property owner, property manager of the property since inception back in the early 1960s. The Housing Authority itself has been working in Needham for the last 75 years. Needham Housing Authority hired us, as Reg said, in 2021 to help them with their repositioning strategy. So the Cambridge Housing Authority, under my stewardship, has been serving as a development consultant with for the Needham Housing Authority, both on the Linden project as well as on some federal repositioning activities and efforts that are underway. But specific to the Linden project, we assisted the Needham Housing Authority in bringing on an architectural and engineering team. Bagman, Henry, and Archetype, BH+A is kind of their common name, a firm that has some Needham connections. They've done a number of Needham jobs, including the senior center and the school administration building that's currently under construction. By way of additional information, they've done a number of redevelopment projects with the Cambridge Housing Authority. So well-versed, well-qualified firm with Needham experience. So they've been handling the architectural and engineering design work. And then joining the Needham Housing Authority team are two attorneys that work directly to Needham Housing Authority. So they don't pass at all through Cambridge Housing Authority. Robert T. Smart has been serving as the local zoning council, assisting the housing authority in the project as it proceeds through the planning and zoning aspects of the project. More recently, in the last 6 months, Needham Housing Authority brought on Klein Horning as a attorney to assist them on kind of the larger development questions that arise when you're proceeding with a project of this type. And again, those two resources are directly under the Needham Housing Authority and report directly to Needham Housing Authority and not to the CHA. So that's the project team. So there's been thousands of hours of work done by all very different parties, and we're really pleased with the progress that we've made in the past year. And I'm going to turn it over to Matt Zajac from my team to kind of walk through elements of where we are with the design and overall project, and then we'll really focus into kind of the meat of your interest, which is some of the financing and specifically the housing authority CPA request. So Matt.
Thanks, Margaret. Next slide, please. Many committee members are likely familiar with the existing conditions at the Linden Street site, as well as the broad outlines of our development plan. So I'm going to present the design slides tonight rather quickly, but if there are any questions, we certainly can return to these visuals. Furthermore, your pre-read packets include the full schematic design materials for your perusal. The Linden Street property is currently composed of 18 bungalow-style buildings that contain 72 studio units. On this map, they're shown in the orange color toward the northeast portion of the site along Linden Street. Next slide, please. The property was developed from 1959 to 1962, and as a result, it's at the end of its useful life in terms of the building systems, both interiors and exteriors. Additionally, there are some features of the building that are now poorly suited to meeting the needs of the elders and disabled households that live there. Two things that always stick out to us are that the units are very small, at 410 square feet, and half of the units require the use of stairs, which is not conducive to the population as they age in place. Overall, this has led us to work with the design team in order to craft a holistic redevelopment vision for the site. Next slide, please. This presents the schematic design site plan for Linden Street. On the right-hand side of the screen, you see the Linden building, which is a proposed 4-story elevator building. The building is divided into 2 wings, which we call Phase 1A and Phase 1B. Phase 1A is 76 units and Phase 1B is 60 units. They're connected by a common core that shares the elevator, the maintenance spaces, the management offices, and they would be financed as one project but built sequentially. So phase 1A would be built, when it's complete, it would be occupied, and then phase 1B would be built. And this sequencing helps to deal with minimizing the relocation of residents on site. Next slide, please. One of the features of the existing landscape that helps to explain why the buildings are positioned the way they are is the wetlands that surround the site. The existing buildings encroach into the wetlands buffers, including almost 19,000 square feet into the, I believe, 50-foot buffer. And in our revised plan, we've attempted to reduce this encroachment as much as possible. Next slide, please. So you see here how the revised building is avoiding those wetlands and buffers as much as possible, as well as being built around respecting the topography of the site. Next slide, please. This slide offers some information on the setbacks from the various lot lines. We'll come later in the presentation to some summary information about the zoning warrant article that is related to this project. And the key thing that this slide offers is a visual depiction of how those setbacks relate to the building. Next slide, please. Here we see a part of the schematic design that we've been really excited to build out over the last couple of weeks. This is the landscape plan, and the Linden Street property is going to benefit from some really nice green spaces. In particular, the community garden to the left of the building. The front of the building, we hope to have an open space area that offers seniors the ability to look out onto the High Rock Middle School athletic fields. And in the rear of the building, we hope to have a patio as well as some walking trails through that forested sort of area near the back. Next slide, please. This slide presents the schematic floor plans for the Linden Street property. Again, phase 1A is 76 units. That is 72 one-bedrooms and 4 two-bedrooms, while phase 1B is 60 units. That's 56 one-bedrooms and 4 two-bedrooms. Next slide, please. This slide offers an elevation of the building, so what the front and rear views would look like. A key piece of information about the building presented here is its maximum roof height of 53 feet. On the next slide, we see that this relates to how this relates to the nearby High Rock Middle School's maximum height. Another feature of the building that we found helpful to sort of contextualize it to the nearby neighborhood is what is its density. So the proposal for Linden Street has a proposed density of 22.4 units per acre. And on the right side of the slide, we see 2 nearby residential communities that have 18 units per acre. On the next slide are 2 nearby properties with slightly higher density. The Rosemary Lake development with 30 units per acre is in some ways a similar topology to the proposed Linden Street building. And then finally, there's one building that's quite dense with over 60 units per acre. Next slide. To conclude the design section of the presentation, we'll offer some views of the building. So this is an aerial view looking from High Rock over towards Maple. And the next slide reverses this view. So now you're looking from Maple over the building towards High Rock. The next slide brings us down to the street view. And here we're standing at the corner of Linden and Blake, looking at lead towards the west, but I sometimes get disoriented. Thank you, Reg. You're always better at that than me. Our next slide reverses the view and we move over to Sylvan Street, looking down Linden. The final view is from the High Rock School looking out towards the center of the proposed building. And then we move into what in some ways is the heart of the presentation, which is a look at the financials and how this project can come to be. The first step in putting a project like this together is assembling a pre-development budget. So this is the budget that brings the project from a concept in the minds of the Needham Housing Authority's board to shovels in the ground. We estimate that the pre-development budget for the project is roughly 2.6 million. And this will be funded primarily through two awarded sources. The 1.38 million in previously awarded CPA funds and 1.25 million in previously awarded ARPA earmarks. The primary usage of the funds is architecture and engineering. Here it's broken down into 3 lines, but it totals 1.9 million, which is roughly 72% of the pre-development budget. Some of the other major expenses you'll see here are legal for the Needham Housing Authority's work with Bob Smart on zoning and development consulting services related to the work of Cambridge Housing Authority. This pre-development budget forms one portion of the overall development budget, which we'll jump into on the next slide. We do wish to offer clarification that in the ultimate budget for the low-income housing tax credit project, some of those expenses you see on the pre-development budget might not appear on that budget because the state has rules around how old expenses can be when they're included in the overall budget. And with that, I'll pass it back to Margaret
Yeah,
to
and-
dive into it.
Thank you, Matt, and I just jump in on that part. So we've been showing all expenses from day one conception to completion, but as Matt said, at some point, we'll have to divide the budget into expenses that started on day one, but won't continue through the tax credit financing period. And so as we go forward, we'll be doing that. So I'm next to cover the project funding sources and uses. So if we can go back to that page, thank you. This is the high level view of the sources and uses that we've put together for the project financing. Just a point of clarification and pride, it's 100% affordable, deeply affordable units, which means that it's income-based housing so that your rent is determined based on the percentage of your income. And not every affordable housing development can say that. They can say they're affordable, but they can't say that they're deeply affordable. But the financing that we've put together here is a deeply affordable project. And they're more difficult to fund because you have to cobble together both the funding for the construction, the actual bricks and mortars, but also the funding for the operating subsidy. So a resident's rent can be subsidized so that they're never paying more than 30% of their funding. And I think folks may recall that, I kind of think about it as a layer cake of financing. And this is really showing you a bit of that layer cake. It's 14 different funding sources that we're cobbling together to cover the projected just under $84 million in total cost for Linden Phase 1A and 1B. So the 14 funding sources are on the left side, and then the uses of them, of the sources are on the right side, and the bulk of it, 76% of the uses is construction or construction contingency. So really going into the bricks and mortars. And then the balance, 24% is various related soft costs from financing fees, which are, as a 4% tax credit deal, we're obligated to use project-based, not project-based, but how many main bonds, private activity bonds, to do the financing and have to have 50% of the project costs covered by those private activity bonds. And that, by just its very nature, adds to the project cost. But absent those bonds, you're not eligible for low-income housing tax credits. So while you have to spend money, you're getting much more money in return. And so I like to just say that as a response to the financing fees being somewhat of an outlier. And we'll go to the next slide and dive a little bit more into the project funding itself. So on this slide, we're really highlighting two components of the funding, which is the tax credit equity and the hard debt. The tax credit equity is the low-income housing tax credits that the project will receive either through the federal public housing, the federal tax program, or in the case, we're looking for and would qualify for state tax credits. And when we work with a private investor, typically a bank or a syndicator, whose their sole interest is buying the tax credit. and taking the relief on their tax return of their taxes. And so we'll have a credit to sell, $1 of credit, and they'll say, oh, I'll buy it for 95 cents, or I'll buy it for $1, or I'll buy it for 85 cents. It's dependent upon what the market is and what the rate of return is and what the interest is. And you strike that deal, and that's what they're getting and buying. And it happens both for the federal tax credits as well as the state tax credit. That accounts for 39% of the overall Linden financing. What I like best about the tax credit equity is, it's money that you don't have to pay back. I mean, it's basically an incentive that the federal or state government is giving to incentivize a private entity to, contribute or support affordable housing production or preservation. And again, what they're getting out of the transaction is the tax credit. What we're getting out of it is affordable housing. For the Needham Housing Authority, it's an easy thing to do because that's the business that it's in, is providing affordable housing. So it's not changing anything about itself, but it is benefiting from a resource that both the state and federal government have allowed and created specifically for affordable housing. The second component that I wanted to highlight on this slide is just what we call hard debt. This is something that does have to be paid back. This would be a permanent loan that the project would take on, that would use the operating subsidy or the income that it's getting both from the resident rent, but also from the operating subsidy that's attached to the property that is helping keep the units deeply affordable. And that loan is sized against the income that we're getting from the resident rent and the voucher subsidy. And that, just as a primer, a voucher is a rental subsidy that in this case, the federal government is giving to the housing authority to help the housing authority support a low-income family in a housing unit, to basically cover the cost of operating that unit at a level that keeps the unit costs at 30% of a resident's income. Because at 30% of a resident income, typically for Needham Housing Authorities, elderly and senior, it's elderly developments is somewhere around $350 per month. And that's not enough money to actually cover the operating costs. So the operating subsidy comes behind the resident rent to cover the balance of the housing authority's expenses, and then here as well to cover the added cost of the debt that the housing authority is taking on. What we've put together for the Needham project is a couple of different types of vouchers. So kind of say not every voucher is alike, not every cat or dog is alike. So there are different vouchers at play here, and the chart on this page just shows where the subsidies are coming from. So 12 of them would come from Needham's own Section 8 program. Each housing authority can allocate up to 20% of their vouchers to a project-based use like Linden and Chambers. And in fact, Needham Housing Authority did this, going back about 15 years ago at High Rock Homes, where they project-based 12 units at that site. And so they actually have, to get to the 20% cap, only 12 units that they can project base, and then they'll be at their 20% cap. So that's the first number. The second number is the rental assistance demonstration, which is an avenue available to housing authorities that are undertaking some federalization activities where, depending upon how they're repositioning their federal portfolio, they create an ability to kind of reuse a federal public housing operating subsidy. And so the Needham Housing Authority has 3 properties that do receive federal public housing operating subsidy. There's High Rock Homes, there's Seabeds, and there's Captain Cook Apartments. And so the idea here is that we would be using some of that Faircloth authority that would be generated from the federalization repositioning at Seabeds and Captain Robert Cook, along with 40 Faircloth units from the Cambridge Housing Authority, to provide that underlying operating subsidy that keeps the unit available. These I call skinny vouchers. They're not as robust as our regular Section 8 budget. The regular Section 8 budget is based on a fair market study of the rents in the area. So in Needham, approximately the one bedroom rent, fair market rent that HUD has established is approximately $2,500. And that's what a Section 8 landlord could potentially expect to get for a one-bedroom apartment. For the rental assistance demonstration, those 100 vouchers, as I said, they're skinny, so they're worth approximately half of the cost of a kind of full value Section 8 voucher. But even though they're worth half, they're still a real invaluable tool for the housing authority in terms of as it's putting together the layer of funding for both the operating costs, but also most importantly, in terms of keeping the units affordable to the residents. And then the last category of vouchers would be coming to the project through a competitive application process provided by the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. Those 24 vouchers would be comparable in full value as the Needham Housing Authority. So those are those $2,500 type vouchers. And so it's the combination of those three vouchers totals to 136 units that are proposed for Linden Street. And again, 36 of them are based on fair market value, so rents close to $2,500 per unit, and then the 100 are those skinny vouchers, as I mentioned. We did get one question about the potential use of MRVPs. So one of the distinctions between state public housing and federal public housing is that federal public housing, you have to demonstrate a type of qualification for citizenship. You know, you'd have to be born in the US, or you have to demonstrate you have some kind of legal status to be in the US to be eligible for and benefit from a federal public housing or rental subsidy. On the state public housing program, it does not require that. And so we've been asked, well, what happens if there's an event where one of the residents at Linden Street happens to be a non-eligible type of citizenship? What would happen with that to that family, and would they be displaced? And the quick answer there is that you could potentially get MRVPs if it was from the state to solve that problem. They've made those vouchers available. They're Massachusetts rental vouchers, so they again don't require any proof of citizenship. So we could use those. But we also will still have state public housing in Needham. The Chambers Street property will be state public housing, so residents could move to that property. And then the third kind of a way a housing authority has handled this would be just to keep the resident within the program, but turn off the federal public housing subsidy. And if you have a small number of residents who don't have that right status, the program can easily accommodate the loss of that federal subsidy for 1, 2, or 3 units. So there's a number of different ways in which the housing authority can address those unique situations. At this point, we don't believe that's a big issue, but it was a question that was asked of us by your consultant, so I just wanted to address that.
I'll jump in and say MRVP is Massachusetts Rental Voucher Program, is Massachusetts version of vouchers. And to remind everybody, there's a 4-page glossary on the back of the detailed due diligence questions here.
And so if we go to the next page, we'll get into the soft funding of the program. So 57% of it is covered either through equity or permanent debt. 43% falls into the category of soft loans. So there's still loans to the projects, but the loans aren't demand payments in the same way as a permanent mortgage is. They are, to the extent that there may be cash flow available, there may be some requirements for repayment. But oftentimes too, they can also be grants that are coming to the housing authority that under the tax credit program, it's better to have the money come in as a loan rather than a grant, so that you can count that as an eligible expense and take advantage of earning a tax credits against that cost. And so we have really like 8 different soft funding categories. Again, EOHLC is the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. They're providing, or we anticipate them providing public housing loan, through their, a variety of, programs that they've set up, particularly for housing authorities that are moving state public housing units from the state program to the federal program. They have an incentive for housing authorities to do that. We actually submitted an application this past fall. We thought it was a long shot, but we also, we thought maybe they wouldn't get as many applications and they would just say, all right, you guys are making really good progress. We're gonna invest in award funding. And so we submitted the application, right around Thanksgiving, and we heard right around Christmas that the funding wasn't, or the application wasn't being invited to come in for a final round this year, but they were very excited about our prospects for next year. So that next fall in November of 2024, they will be looking for an application for us, and they'll see that with fingers crossed, our zoning work will be done and we'll have the zoning in place and we'll have gotten the other funding that we would need so that their funding could come in on a project that is shovel ready. So that was why it was disappointing, or, you know, again, it was a bit of a hope for us to get it. We knew we weren't 100% checking all the boxes of being eligible for it. We I think got really some very positive feedback from them in terms of the prospects for the future. The second line is also from the same state division, but it's the housing production side. So there are two parts. There's the public housing side that supports state public housing, and then there's the housing production side that supports new creation of new units. So the Linden work is a combination. It has public housing units that we're replacing as well as new units. So the public housing side of EOHLC will pay and help support the redevelopment and reconstruction of the public housing side. The housing production side will support the new units. And they actually have aligned their applications now so that you can apply for both at the same time. So next November, we'll apply. We did not apply for any new production funding this year because it was clearly we are not at a point where we're eligible to even be considered. And sometimes those are considered nuisance applications and frowned upon. So we did not want to be in the frowned upon category. So we have been alerting folks that it's coming, but we knew we weren't ready. The next two line items, 3 and 4, are funds that your state legislator has been very proactive in getting earmarks for the project. So we've got $1.25 million, which actually showed up on the pre-development budget Matt talked about a moment ago. So that's that line, and that's an earmark that was in a legislative act. And same with number 4, Partnership for Growth, another earmark of 1.5 specific to the Linden project. So we have access and can spend the $1.25 million, and that's a big resource right now for pre-development. The 1.5 is earmarked, but would need to be activated by the folks at EOHLC because it's bond funding, and so it needs to be. You can have it awarded, but they have to do one extra step to actually allow for you to actually access it. And then the balance are, there's a variety of energy incentives out there, so we're leaning in on them. We're applying for local home funding, needed as part of the consortium, so we want to lean in on that. Obviously, number 7 is the one you're most familiar with, which is CPA funds, and that's showing the combination of the funds that were granted by the CPA in spring of 2022, plus our $5.5 million loan. And then number 8 is an NHA loan. So one of the things people say, well, where that's coming from and why do you need, any money at all? That's coming from the repositioning of seabeds and Captain Robert Cook. So as part of that project, we're going to be able to, switch out of the public housing operating subsidy program and switch 80% of the units into that higher Section 8 rent. And in doing so, we'll generate enough income not only to do the capital work that needs to happen at those 2 sites, but generate some leftover income that kind of spills over or provides the support that's identified here to support the redevelopment of the Linden project. I just wanted to call out that the leverage, 2 things, the CPA funds we would not be in front of you today with the project that actually pencils out if you guys did not provide the $1.386 million that's allowed us to do the design work and understand what needs to be done for zoning and get all of the things that the town meeting will be considered in May. If you did not provide those funds, we would not be able to demonstrate that we had anything or any, so I just wanted to call attention to that and thank you for that, because it is showing that this project is viable. There's a path to funding it. And it's an exciting project. I know for the Needham Housing Authority, when I finished High Rock Homes as part of the development team that worked on that 15 years ago, I already knew Linden was your next priority. And it's been a hard 15 years to get here for the Needham Housing Authority, but I know the Needham Housing Authority staff and board are really proud to be here tonight. And then the 5.5 is certainly a substantial ask, but I just wanted to note that for every dollar of CPA funds, Needham Housing Authority is leveraging $10 of other money. And really, your funds are critical to this project. Really, this project cannot go forward without the CPA funds. And the amount of additional dollars that it's bringing to Needham, bringing to the effort to redevelop and kind of make right the Linden property is just something I wanted to note and just really applaud the CPA committee and the Needham community for even considering the application. We've been asked about other, my job, Matt's job, and the team behind us, as I mentioned at the start of the meeting, I've got 25 staff members who work for me directly, is to look under every rock and stone to figure out if there's other funding that we can bring in. And we're basing this on estimates of cost that we have now. A lot of things can change between where we are today and when we close on the project. Hopefully interest rates will go down, not up, but we don't know. You're always kind of trying to right size the budget to a point where you're going to be able to either stretch it to close or shrink or revise the design so you can get it to fit within other resources. So, we continue to look for resources. Last year, we had suggested to the town that they allow us to apply for Mass Works financing, funding for projects. Housing projects do qualify that, so we had a conversation. There was other competing priorities within town, so the town, we have to have somebody sign off from the town to put that application in, and the other priorities took precedent, and so we weren't in, but we'll be having that conversation with the town again this spring. The portal for the Mass Works application just opened, or will be opening in February. The training starts in February, but the applications themselves are due later in the spring. And so that would be, again, something that we would be looking to fund, and that may either help if another funding number doesn't come through, or help if costs go up or interest rates go up and all of that. But our job between now and closing is to continue to look for anything that we can bring to the table to keep the project moving forward and keeping it viable. And then just to call out the last sources, the other sources, we've got three. There's a little bit of cash flow towards the end of construction that we can lean on, basically to pay some of the debt service that will be outstanding at that point in time. We would be looking to defer a portion of the developer fee that is part of the project. And then I'm looking to have a conversation with the town around building permit waiver.
Not the permit fee. waiver.
Permit fee. Excuse me. We do
We
not
will
want-
get.
We will get a demo permit. Thank you, Rich. And then, just the next sheet just tells you exactly kind of where we are, what's been secured, what's been approved, and, kind of what the timing is of the various different things. So, having done this for over 25 years, this is really kind of not at all surprising of where we are, both in terms of what's been applied for and secured to date, and what's still out there for us to secure. All of them are things that are achievable. I do want to reference the tax credits. I had noted that we need private activity bonds to generate the tax credits. And it's been an unprecedented time in Massachusetts in terms of the demand on private activity bonds. That's really the key to getting the 4% tax credits, the only way to get the 4% tax credits. And it's never been more competitive than it is right now. Usually you would say, you know, there are two forms of federal credits. One's the 9%, one's the 4%. The 9% credits have always been competitive, and you could wait 3 years or 4 years in line before you would get a 9%. There has not been typically a waiting period for the 4%, but currently there is, and the state is working hard to figure it out. There's some legislation pending in Congress that would look to address or alleviate the problem. It's not solely a unique problem in Massachusetts, which is good, because I think that means there's going to be more impetus for a resolution. It affects 21 other states, and including the District of Columbia. But I just didn't, you know, you're probably going to hear that from another source. I just wanted to make sure that I referenced that in my conversation with you tonight. And just turning to the income and expenses as it relates to both the operating income that the property would receive, but then also the operating expenses, and then at the end of the day, how it translates into what we can support for a permanent loan. And I think this chart, more than the other one, really shows you the difference between those full value vouchers I mentioned and the skinny vouchers that I mentioned. So you can see the two vouchers, the one directly from the NHA and the one coming from the state, where we're talking a total of 36 unit vouchers. There's the rent is $2,615 for the 1 bedrooms, and then $3,100 for the 2 bedroom. And they, you know, between those 36 units, we're getting almost $1.2 million of income. And then you get to the Faircloth, the RAD, the skinny vouchers, as I call them, which again is based off of a federal public housing operating subsidy. And the rents are more than half of the other ones, but they are generating $1.5 million of total income. So the total income for the 136 units is just under $2.7 million. And that's a very healthy income, and, you know, particularly, but key to that is making sure you kind of get the right operating expenses. So, one of the complaints against housing authorities, Needham, across the state, across the country, is you don't do a good job taking care of your stuff. So why should we invest in you? And part of the reason why a housing authority is not able to take care of its stuff is that it's been squeezed down on funding. So Needham Housing Authority gets less than $6,000 per unit to operate Linden Street right now from the state public housing program. For the federal public housing program, for High Rock Homes and for Seabeds and Captain Robert Cook, it's just over $9,000 per unit. And that's a big difference, but it's still not quite where you would want it to be. So here we're, I think, just under $11,000 per unit. So the idea is that you're putting in the right budget to be actually able to do the maintenance. The other thing that a housing authority hasn't had the resources to do is that we're really dependent upon getting capital funding from either the state or the federal government. And it comes in a formula, but it's, you're getting less than $1,000 per unit of capital money per year. And it is never enough to do all of the things that you need. And here we're going to be funding a replacement reserve. We're going to be paying down a loan. It actually allows a housing authority, the resources, to be a better steward to their housing than staying as it is right now. So the key, the takeaway from this slide is just, again, the income is derived, how it's derived, and what it results to, how we've right-sized the annual operating expenses so the resources are there to allow the Needham Housing Authority to do a good job, and then how the balance goes and supports the loan, so that we're showing a loan at $15.5 million. It will result in and that's based on a 5% vacancy loss. Typically, a housing authority property should be at 98% occupancy, not 95%. So that's another question that's in there. And, and it gives you, I hope, some assurance that our math is correct on, how the debt, applies. We did get a question on debt service coverage ratio being 1.1, but, some people feel that is low. And we were asked if we get specific, proposals. We actually have right now from a couple of different banks, proposals that would be at 1.1 on projects that we're working for. And that's not,
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Is, in that, those proposals, is the rate 6%, because rates are,
actually, they're a little bit better than the 6% right now, yeah. So that's still, but that's an excellent question. I mean, we're always either constantly going up or down,
yeah,
depending upon what the market is, and then I've been a little bit more inclined to be staying at the 6%, even though I'm seeing a little bit lower, because it's just not 100%. I'm feeling more confident about the rate going down. If you had looked at this about 6 months ago, I'd be at 6 3/4. So, we're always constantly adjusting. But we do have, the debt service coverage ratio at 1.10, particularly for a project that's 100% supported by vouchers, by a housing assistance payment contract that HUD is providing the housing authority to provide that operating subsidy. Banks have gone down to the 1.1 pretty regularly for the projects that we've been involved with. But that was one of the questions that Emily did have for us, and we just wanted to share a response. The next slide just talks about kind of the impacts on town services, and this Linden is going to be similar to what it is now, an elderly disabled development. So the schools are gonna not be impacted. Police, to what extent they already go there, or fire, paramedical or public health, kind of the same. Senior Central Library, hopefully, there'll be an active engagement and robust use of both of those resources by not only new residents, but current residents. And then we didn't talk about, but in the design, the project is required to absorb all of its own stormwater on site. And so it will not worsen the pretty significant flooding concerns that the neighbors experience, and certainly what we saw last August when we had that flash rain. And then we are pursuing a couple of kind of areas of relief. Right now, the project does not pay any real estate taxes, and so in an ideal situation, that would continue. But that is a request that we need to make, and the town needs to provide. And just to say, for every $1 of real estate tax that we would have to, if we had to pay something, it actually lowers our ability to take on private financing almost to the $16 to every $1. So it's a meaningful benefit that these projects have. And as Reg mentioned, not looking to waive the building permit, but the fee. And you can see the estimate of the fee is over $1 million. So that is another way in which we can kind of work to preserve costs. And then just quickly, there's always concern, about the management of a big redevelopment project. And, particularly, the Needham Housing Authority is a much smaller agency. I mean, I think they were a lot of credit to Reg and the staff to think about bringing on a development consultant. And, we happen to be growing that aspect of our business at Cambridge Housing Authority. At the same time, the RFP was issued, and we actually are working now with 15 different housing authorities providing development consulting services. I particularly was interested in Needham, having been here 15 years earlier, serving as a development consultant on High Rock Homes. So I felt like, I had some history here, some success here. And I felt the work, it was an opportunity to come back and continue to build on the work that happened. And so I went to my boss and said, could we apply? And he said absolutely, and I think it's been a great relationship. The two housing authorities working together, I think, is the model. We have strengths and expertise that Needham Housing Authority doesn't have, and then Needham Housing Authority has the relationship and the commitment to the community that even though we share the same mission, we don't come in on day one having. And I think, the working together has been strong, and I really have enjoyed working, with the staff, with the board, on the project. And we hope to and expect to continue to be working with the Needham Housing Authority Board and having Needham lean into really the talent of the Cambridge Housing Authority. We're a nationally recognized innovative housing authority. We've been part of the Moving to Work program since its inception in 1999. That's a deregulation program that allows us to create unique and special programs that are much more responsive to critical housing needs in Cambridge. We have over 3,000 units of housing, including 2,600 former public housing units. So I've been very successful in repositioning the Cambridge Housing Authority portfolio and adding somewhere around $20 million to the Housing Authority's annual budget every year. And that's a game changer. That opens the door to providing much better housing to our residents, much better services and better outcomes. Since 2010, we've done $1 billion in financing, 23 different LIHTC deals, over $650 million of construction. So there's not a construction issue or problem that we haven't faced and solved. And we had 5 projects ongoing during COVID, 3 at elderly developments, which, if you want to know what kept me up at night in those early days, it was making sure that our residents and our staff and our construction workers stayed safe, and we were able to achieve that and complete those projects on time, despite, really very challenging situations. So CHA will be with Needham Housing Authority as the owner's project manager. Matt and our planning team will be part of the putting together all of the financing and assisting with all the due diligence and the closing. We've done it 24 other times because we've closed a project outside of Cambridge. So 22 in Cambridge and one in another community. And then it will be supported by our construction team that also works for me. We have Goran Smalchek, who has 20 years of experience. He actually was, before coming to the Cambridge Housing Authority over 5 years ago, the Director of Inspectional Services for the City of Somerville. So he is exceptional, and the team he has in place is bar none the best construction team I've seen, and I've been doing this work over 30 years. And they would be overseeing the day-to-day construction, making sure that the contractor completes the work in accordance with the specification, working with the architect as well on that same charge, and making sure the quality control and quality assurance is in place for the building to be built the right way, and to stop it if it's not being built the right way, and to use the best practices in the industry. I mean, we've done a phenomenal amount of energy savings and energy conservation measures as part of the $650 million of work that we've done in Cambridge, and we've seen a dramatic change in the energy profiles of our building, as well as the reduction of greenhouse gas emission. So we have those experiences as well that we offer the Needham Housing Authority as well as our other housing authority clients. And the next page just gives you that list of that almost $2 million project. And we're going to be closing another project that in the next 3 to 4 months that will be our biggest to date, and we'll be inching up closer to that $1.5 billion number before I could even expect. And then, as I mentioned, the BH+A team, the team that's working for the on the design team has a tremendous amount of experience both in Needham but also on housing projects. And I think, I've been very, very pleased with the team that they have on Linden Street. And they've been really responsive and creative and really dedicated in coming up with what we think is a really exceptional design for the project. And then now, am I doing this slide? Did we decide? As I mentioned, the Cambridge Housing Authority and the Needham Housing Authority fully expect to continue our relationship. We've been working together since 2021. So we're working right now on kind of the terms to extend that arrangement through, kind of us serving as a developer and with the Needham Housing Authority. And key and why we get called developer rather than development consultant is our balance sheet. So an equity investor and lender is gonna wanna say, all right, this is a great project. We love Needham, we love the Needham Housing Authority, but what happens if the project goes sideways? Needham Housing Authority, and they'll look at, sorry, Reg, your balance sheet, and they'll say, there's not enough here. But they'll look at Cambridge's balance sheet and they'll say, all right, we can underwrite this because there's resources and experience to address, one, hopefully prevent anything from going sideways, but you always have to make certain you plan for that. And then two, if it were to go sideways, that there would be resources available through the balance sheet.
It's just reality, anybody who's gonna be loaning that kind of money or providing that kind of money, investing in the project. It doesn't matter whether it's us or a private sector deal, is going to be looking for guarantees and we can't provide them.
Are you saying that Cambridge Housing Authority will put some of its assets online for this project?
Yes,
Yeah, we would serve as a guarantor, so that if for some reason, like. I could go on for hours, so I probably better not, because you guys have questions, but there are certain guarantees, like, the investor lender is gonna wanna make sure there's a construction completion guarantee.
Right.
So somebody has to own that. And that can be a big number. I mean, you know what the construction budget number needs to be. And so all of our Cambridge deals have that. And, if for a Needham deal to get financing, they would have to have it, but Needham itself doesn't have a balance sheet to do that, so then you need to lean into somebody else's balance sheet. So yes, the Cambridge Housing Authority would be putting its balance sheet at risk.
Question?
Well, how much more do you,
one more slide, I think.
Yeah, and then this is where I think it's most important for everyone to know that Klein Horning, an attorney that we mentioned at the very beginning. That's part of the team that the Needham Housing Authority has in place to make sure that their interests are best represented in the conversation that we have right now.
And I should just jump in and say Klein Horning is a leading, regional law firm with national credentials. That know how to negotiate.
Turning it over to you.
okay,
I'm gonna really quickly just bring us home with a look at the path ahead. This slide presents a chart of the milestones and that we're hoping to accomplish this year. You'll see that we're gonna be advancing the design during the spring leading up to the town meeting, where we hope to receive approvals for several warrant articles. Following that, the goal is to seek site plan approval in July. This would roll into developing the full construction documents that are available to work with a general contractor to get bids to actually put shovels in the ground. A key milestone here you'll see in the autumn is the application to the winter rental round. This is when the state will make those large sums of money that were the soft loans in the budget available. The construction loan closing is hopefully going to happen just off this slide in 2025. On the next slide, we provide an overview of the warrant articles that are going to be at town meeting. There are three main ones. One relates to the creation of affordable housing district. This allows the project to proceed as of right under zoning, which is a key priority for our state funders. The second one, the map article, places that zoning district onto the Linden Chamber site. And finally, there's a non-warrant zoning article and non-zoning warrant article. This deals with cleaning up some vestigial land use restrictions on the property and allowing, again, the property to proceed as conceived within the plan. Some key dates on here, just for everyone's reference, the 27th of February is the planned public hearing from the planning board. And I believe their goal is then to vote approval on March 5th. The next slide is a reference slide that demonstrates how the proposed development compares to the proposed zoning. Important factor here is, again, how it allows the property to proceed as of right, meeting that state priority. Finally, the last slide offers a few milestones that we expect to see moving forward specific to the CPC process. We've mapped out the potential of a second hearing in February, and then the potential for the March public hearing and vote. And with that, we are excited to take your questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Dean, back to you.
Yes, for slide 8, I had a question and, maybe just need the slide again to really be able to format that question. There was a bullet point, the third bullet point, public housing authorities like Needham Housing Authority will partner with a third party to take on the risks and requirements, et cetera. Is Cambridge Housing Authority that third party?
Yes,
Okay, that's all I wanted to understand. Okay, thank you.
You talking about 8
38.
It's, yeah, page 30.
page?
Yeah, I got confused.
Can I just make sure, I believe that I promoted both Maureen and Emily as, to be able to, speak, although we can't see you, or there you are, Maureen, great. I just wanted to make sure we got that. straight.
Emily was on mute.
I
see.
think I think you unmuted me. I accepted being unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
We can,
Perfect.
right.
Any other comments from people at the table? Laura?
Just one, the zoning that we just talked about, where it says non-zoning warrant articles authorizes the select board to execute and record corrective deeds, instruments, releases, or other documents as it deems necessary to clear the title to the land in the AHD, which I'm assuming means affordable housing district. In particular, the existing requirement that units be limited to seniors. Does that mean we are not going to limit the units to seniors, or we are?
So it means we are not, as of the way things stand now, the units will be for seniors for the foreseeable future. It's really the zoning, the discussion for a couple of months between the planning board and the select board. Is it permanently restricted as affordable? And everybody agrees to that.
Yes.
And then do we continue to have it restricted in the zoning or in the, town warrant article or any other way, to seniors and disabled? And there's a big, debate and pros and cons of which way to go. And the select board wrote a letter to the planning board saying, we recommend to the planning board not to have any such restrictions. And the planning board replied, when they voted the final approval of the zoning articles, agreed with that position.
Thank you.
Mayor.
Jane, I'm sorry.
On the planning, but I just want to say that, it seemed, we were told, and the select board was told that one of the reasons to do that is to enhance the, ability to get the funding from the various agencies. And that was what convinced us that if it helps with getting the funding, then we'll do it.
Okay, Dave?
Yeah, I got a couple questions. Number one, I was hoping that you would have mentioned, my understanding that, if the CPC awards $5.5 million, which is what's asked to, this project, that, that money would not be spent until closing and after closing.
I'm sorry, that's
And
correct.
therefore, this money is not really at risk in the sense that if some of these other funding approaches don't play out or things change, economically, that the money is not going to be at risk.
Correct,
That
yeah,
once you get to closing, then you're not going to get to closing unless all the funding has been pretty much secured.
correct. So I would imagine that the grant contract that would come with the CPA would state that it would only be available post-closing for construction.
Yeah, well, I think that's an important point that
Yeah.
needs to be stressed because
Yeah.
I know it was.
That's what
it was
our
an important
assumption
point
has
last
been.
year. And, it gave some people some agita that the town would be putting its money at risk.
Yeah.
Follow-up question on that?
I still.
Oh, I'm
I'm
sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Well, go, if you have a follow-up.
Yeah, will there be a certain period of time, I was thinking about this today, that this money, okay, suppose we approve the award. Will there be a certain number of years that if this closing does not occur, we would get the money back and be able to spend it on some other housing project? Is there, having a certain amount of years, that the funds are sitting
I'll
there
jump in
waiting?
on that to begin with, which is, and then I'll see I'm in training with Margaret, and so I think it has full rights to say I'm wrong. So we think we have a very good shot at getting funding in the first funding round, which is, as you saw, we apply in the fall and hear about it in April 2025. But there's a 50-50 or, chance you heard about what she said about the private activity bonds and so forth, that we don't make it. And it's not uncommon to take 2 or 3 rounds. So while there could be a provision the CPC wants to put in, we would, advocate for it being something like 5 years or something, and then subject to renewal, we can always come back and say, would you extend it further? So, some provision sort of like that.
Yeah, it seemed to me there should be some period of time.
Okay.
Dave, go ahead, finish your.
Yeah, I just have 2 more questions. Second question, have you considered alternative project delivery? This project?
In terms of modular construction or?
Yeah, like construction management at risk or.
Oh, yeah, I mean-
And/or design build.
So we are gonna be subject to, because there are federal resources in the project, so we have to comply with federal procurement requirements, but there was a legislative law passed a year or so ago that allows the project to be exempt from 149 and 149A, so that it opens the door for an alternative approach to bidding the project, so that we wouldn't have to use file sub bids particularly. And we believe, from my experience, that should be a savings to the project of somewhere around 20%. And so we've been assuming that, but we don't get out of any procurement because of the fact that there'll be federal resources there. But we are going to take advantage of the ability to lean into that procurement relief the state legislature did provide, particularly for these types of projects.
Yeah, that kind of segues into my third question. If the cost estimate, construction cost estimate,
Mhm.
was like it's based on a schematic design, it's like a factor in square foot
Yeah.
cost estimate. How comfortable do you feel?
So
That
this is
estimate.
where my $650 million in construction experience really comes in helpful. And we have actual real numbers. And so when we get an estimate like the kind that we get for Linden at schematics for a project in Needham or a project in Cambridge, we actually compare that against the projects that we had recently bid, or look at it historically and see if it makes sense or not. And we believe that the Needham estimate is right in line. I mean, it's in line. We have a project that is almost to 100% construction documents that we'll be bidding later this spring. That, we're following both of those cost estimates very closely against, our own experience pricing. And then we're out right now on a project pricing right now, real time. And for another project, we actually brought in a construction manager who gave us a close to as real bid as we could, again, off of schematic design. So it's not fully baked, but I feel very confident and comfortable with where we are.
And I would
It
just-
looks like you have like you're looking at like a 5% a year construction.
Escalation, yeah.
Something like
Yeah, there's
And then you have a 10% contingency,
for design, right?
so you feel comfortable with
Yeah.
that?
And Matt, you're gonna add?
Is
I
that-
was just gonna have one point I think that's particularly useful with the other cost estimates we're able to pull in is one of them is an extremely similar project to this. It's a suburban community redevelopment of state public housing that's gonna benefit from the relief. So as far as comps go, with things going out for, they're further along, it's, I think, the best possible example.
Yeah, we've been following, the Salem Housing Authority has been working, and they're due to close actually on their financing in February. And we've been tracking and working, they've been very generous with their information on pricing from their contractor, and again, falling in line to what everything we're seeing, not only here, but at the other projects that we're working on.
You have to pay
Prevailing wage,
everything,
Yeah.
but you're not gonna be subject to a project later.
no.
Let me bring, Emily, do you have a comment or a question?
Yes, I do. Thanks for the presentation. As always, it's fascinating, and to see all the details falling into place is great. I do have a question. We discussed this. I discussed this with CHA, was it yesterday? So I'll bring it up again. to me, if there's an Achilles heel in this project, it's the dependency on Seabed's Cook. And I guess just to be clear about it, in order to release the contributions that are required from Seabed's Cook, which are the two aspects. One is the 60 Faircloth vouchers, and the other is the NHA sponsor loan that's going into the project, 6.8 million, which is going to come from essentially equity takeout in Seabed's Cook. So my concern, as I expressed to them yesterday, is we now have not one but two tax exempt bond credit dependent projects that have to happen in an order. I mean, in order for Linden to happen, Seabed's Cook has to happen. And if Seabed's Cook gets delayed, Linden will get delayed. And because of the problems with the really unusual situation of extreme competition for the tax exempt bonds, my concern is that, I mean, it's hard enough, and we keep talking about this, not every project gets funded the first time around. But in this case, we have two projects that have to get funded the first time around. And just looking at your numbers that you sent on Seabed's Cook, we're talking about, did I do this math right? Per unit, it's $725,000 per unit right now, TDC. Looking for tax exempt debt of around 18 million. So my concern is just, I guess, as you've made the case very forcefully, you have to start somewhere, and you can't get in the door with HLC in the fall round unless you have not only the zoning but other commitments lined up. So I think that it's appropriate to be asking at this time for the commitment, but I think that the likelihood of getting two projects funded next year doesn't seem great to me. So I just feel that there should be an understanding that it's harder to fund two than one. And I had some questions about how high a priority for the state Seabed's Cook will be. Clearly, the linkage between the two has got to be made as an argument, but it means that HLC needs to be giving up, an extra, 6.8 million in bond cap in order for there to be equity takeout to fund this project. So it's a little, I think it's a challenge to get them both funded quickly, unless we have some great breakthrough. I heard a conversation this morning about, hopefully changes at the federal level that will free up that might potentially double the amount of volume cap that we have available in Massachusetts, which would be great. But there's a very long line waiting. And so how do we deal with the extra risk presented by the second project?
I just wanted to thank Emily for the point. I think it is a really astute point that, the two projects being linked together does create an additional financing challenge. But we circulated a few additional responses to Emily's thoughts this morning, and there's sort of a written additional detail on the Seabed's and Cook project and why we think it's a state priority, as well as the budget in there. So if you haven't seen the materials, we can pass them out after the meeting too.
Pass them around now, but
I can display it.
yeah, and if you could email it out, Lauren, to
I did.
Maureen.
And I think just 2 points that I wanted to really pick up on in there is how important the linkage of the two projects we think will be. The state, but a huge priority on moving these projects that are state public housing out of their system, which Margaret mentioned in her presentation. And this provides a mechanism for them to do it, as well as potentially to a few more other local resources, both the Faircloth authority that it opens, which is the ability to create those skinny vouchers, and potentially those proceeds from the acquisition. So while it's a challenge, we really do think we can create a compelling case, and Margaret's $1 billion in financing kind of is I think the the recipe that we just have to follow.
Yeah, I mean, it is, you hate to have to do an A to get to a B, but the only way you're gonna get to the B here is to go through A. And what gets the state's attention is the ability to open the door to the federal dollars and to solve, the 72 units of state public housing. They will never have to be responsible for those units again. And they are looking for those opportunities. And they have created specific funding programs to fund those opportunities. And I think they know that, and they've asked housing authorities in Massachusetts that have federal resources to be thinking about ways in which they can generate the kind of fair cloth or the kind of resources that we proposed here. So I think we're on the cutting edge of this, but I think it's gonna become the new norm because the state really can't and hasn't been supporting its state public housing for a very long time, and units are at risk. Units are in very poor condition, and they know they just can't sit back and wait anymore. A few years ago, there was a population of buildings and units where the affordability was coming due, and there was a real pressure on how we're going to save these units, and it became the #1 priority across the state programs to do that. And I think state public housing is, the Globe tells us, if we're on the Globe, the state public housing resource in Massachusetts is in dire risk. And I think you have to be creative to solve it because there's not enough resources to do it. And this is a pathway that does it, and certainly a pathway that we took in Cambridge over 10 years ago when we federalized our entire state portfolio, when we had a little sliver of opportunity as part of the Obama stimulus package. That sliver you guys actually used at High Rock Homes, and that sliver exists now with these fair cloth units. And the biggest risk I think is not that we're going to get the state on board, but at some point the feds are going to close the door. And to me, that's the piece I've got to really make sure that the state fully understands that the opportunity is now. And if you wait too long, the opportunity may not exist.
And I can jump in here and say, for the board, other board members in here, been here since day one, and the executive director, we've recognized, Emily's point is absolutely spot on, and we've recognized that, it's a heavy lift for us to just do one project at a time. Let's to forget about the timing, you wouldn't want to do 2 projects at the same time as a small housing authority like us, but it's really the only path that's available. It's the only credible path that's available. And then I think the other and so the board has reviewed this several times over and said, let's go, let's do it. And also what I think we've been taught and we've learned during this last couple of years, 2.5 years we've been working together, is you have to get to the point of being, they call it shovel ready or ready to rock and roll, whatever you want. You got to be knocking at that door with a fully baked project this fall, and things change. Things change, and all of a sudden there is a reform, or there is more money, or maybe the governor's new housing bill really starts to get some traction, and that affects things because it also has additional resources in it. And you have to be ready to go. And then, we may be successful in the first time around. We may have to wait a year. We wish we didn't have the dependency on Seabeds and Cook, but we do. Otherwise, there's no way to find the money for Linden and Chambers. And Linden and Chambers, just to remind, I think everybody knows this, but just for our audience, has been the top town redevelopment priority since 2004. And so here we are, finally 20 years later, at the brink of being able to deliver on that town priority.
And I think, Rich, we would all agree that the renovation, reconstruction of that property is vital. The need is obvious to all of us. I think, and to Jean's point, when we commit the money, it is going to be tied up for a period of time. And we're not going to be able to do some of the things possibly that we would like to do with other applications coming in. So I think, the sooner we're able to get an answer and you're able to get an answer, the more comfortable we'll be. I don't know when that will be, but when we start talking about 3, 4, 5 years, that becomes a little bit uncomfortable. You can only do what you can do, but we're thinking down the road, because we've already heard of projects that want to be funded, and we don't want to have to say no to them.
Mhm.
Anyone else? Laura,
Other,
Oh, sorry. go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
No, Emily, you go.
I don't know if Maureen has had a chance.
Emily, did you have a question?
do you want me to go ahead? Okay, I was just trying to think as a plan B, is there a scenario that would involve doing Seabed's Cook not with tax exempt bonds, but taxable? So it wouldn't be a tax credit, so it would be a much leaner project, but would still be a way to, if you could find the $6.8 million somewhere else. And do that project, in a shallower way where there wasn't the equity takeout. And replaced that source with 6.8 million from somewhere else. Is that a possibility?
I think you could probably never get out of doing some form of tax credit transaction, because I think that, you have to pass the HUD standard to qualify for the conversion, which is showing 20 years of viability. And that's a combination of doing upfront work that needs to happen right away, but then showing that you have the money set aside in a replacement reserve to cover the next 20 years of work. So, I've seen in some of the projects I've worked on that I've had to set aside $4 million to cover those out years, even though I'm doing, $175,000 per unit worth of work. There's a whole calculation that you need to go through. But you definitely could drop the acquisition price and the takeout that is of that $6 million and lower the ask so that it's more, your ask for private activity bonds is smaller if you're able to find a replacement for that NHA note that's coming over to Linden. And, we're certainly, we don't stop thinking about our numbers any day. And so that, I've thought that very same thought where I can find out another resource. And that can be part of the negotiations when we go into HLC and we've got the project where we've got everything but their stuff all ready to go, that, they may come up with a resource that takes out that requirement so they can squeeze both of them out with less private activity bonds. I'll just say, we had another project we've been involved in that the public housing side of HLC came in with more money so that we wouldn't have to go through the public housing production side of HLC, so that we would be streamlined and ready to perform. So there's all kinds of ways in which you can get to where you want to go, and we're certainly, we always are looking at whatever adjustment or change or opportunity to get from where we are or what the obstacle is in front of us to then get through the door into a final closing.
Anything else, Emily?
Oh, that's it.
Maureen, do you have anything you want to add?
I just was going to ask, I know in the timeline you had listed that you were, CHA and NHA were negotiating a contract and hopefully it was going to be settled in February, and I wondered if that seems to be, you're on track to do that.
We're close to being on.
Yeah, I could be March, certainly it's going to be before the end of March,
Yeah.
but in February, we're plodding along.
Yeah, a little bit of a wrinkle on our side. Our general counsel retired.
Well, not just her.
I know, I was gonna go, so our general counsel retired. Last week was her last week, so we've been planning for that. But then our CHA's outside counsel actually just got stolen by Washington DC, Housing Authority to serve as their general counsel. So, we have that little hiccup to get over, which makes me worried a little bit about February, but
I was gonna say
I'm
that
not willing to concede it.
specifics, that's why I
Yeah.
sort of said, you
I'm not
know.
willing to concede it, but, we're
And then,
working
and
along
by the way, that coaching just took place the other day,
just the other day. Yeah.
so. But we're making progress.
Thank you. Anyone at the table?
One
Laura?
question, I guess I'm just want to be sure, who will be responsible for, the maintenance of the project upon completion?
Good, I put that one there.
Annual maintenance.
You go ahead.
Sure, so the plan for the project is for Cambridge Housing Authority to act as the managing agent. And then an element of the development agreement conversation that Margaret Ledger is having is about the long-term role of the Needham Housing Authority, in which there may be the opportunity to carve out management functions that they would do on a contract basis, with the overall supervision of CHA's team.
So we're, is active part of the negotiation, developer partner agreement here is, it's called a sub-management agreement, so we would be in essence a subcontractor to, the entity that is owning the building and running the building for the tax credit investors here.
Do you have the resources for that?
Well, we're doing it now. You know, we're, in other words, we're already maintaining 72 broken down units right now. And so now we would be maintaining, you know, same old toilets that need to be unplunged and so forth. I mean, a lot of it's similar. None of us are going to be maintaining the high-tech HVAC system, you know, that's,
Right.
you know, you have to have a specialized HVAC contractor to do, but the day-to-day break and fix stuff, you know, it's the same before as it
And
is.
you'll have
after.
sufficient funding to do
Yeah,
that.
you should have a lot less problems.
I've been learning that that's not necessarily true with a new building. So interesting, that was my assumption as well.
And the overall operating budget to support both the work of NHA and CHA combined is gonna effectively double from the like 6,000 a year per unit to roughly 11,000 that we're currently.
So at least we'll be funded. And, you know, we'll still have 80 chambers units, old chambers units there for the time being, and they need to be maintained by us. And so we want to make sure that the housing authority has a critical mass of maintenance staff that we can cover all our responsibilities, you know, after buildings, you know, phase 1A and 1B building are built.
You know, currently, there's a lot of on-street parking on Linden Street. Will that continue to be the case?
Well, so, there's not supposed to be any on-street parking, overnight parking there or anywhere else in Needham, as you know. The current on-street parking sometimes is school activities, of course, or extracurricular sports stuff. We will have sufficient parking on
You will.
site for
Okay.
everybody. And the planning board has reviewed that extremely carefully over the last 2 or 3 months here. And, so, you know, all our residents will be able to park on site and visitors and so forth.
Okay. Anyone else? Jean?
Yeah, all along, I've had a hard time getting my head around, the structure of deals like this. And I'm reminded of that when, Laura asked who will handle, maintenance post-construction. And it was said the Cambridge Housing Authority will act as managing agent. The Needham Housing Authority will be a subcontractor to the entity that will, quote, own the property for tax credit purposes. Now, I take it that's not the Cambridge Housing Authority.
No.
It's some sort of trust.
It's a limited liability corporation, an
Limited liability
LLC.
corporation.
And then LLC will have typically two members. The 99.99% member will be the investor member, and they have to have that 99.99 to get the advantage of the tax credits. The 0.01% investor is gonna be the managing member. And that's gonna be an entity that the NHA and MHA and NHA and CHA set up and share.
Oh, I see.
And-
NHA and CHA
Well,
was set up.
yeah, so
I knew
co-
about the, like, point, I thought it
That-
was 1%, but it's 0.01%.
Yes.
Yeah, and but effectively, the managing member makes the day-to-day, oversees the day-to-day operations of the ownership, that LLC entity. And so CHA and NHA, get my N's and M's right, would share the managing member LLC. But because the Cambridge Housing Authority's balance sheet is at risk, will be the prime member of, will be the decision maker of that managing member entity. We'll consult with, engage the Needham Housing Authority, but there needs to be one entity that will be the voice of that managing member.
And if I may add, and it may be too much detail, and this is part of me practicing because I have to explain this all the time. So, and it's good. It's sort of an audition for me, and Margaret will correct me if I'm wrong. But, I think everybody kind of gets it why an investor forks over, in this case, 30 million bucks, or several investors, and never get that money back because the credits flow every year from this 99.99% private owned entity. They flow through to the the P&L tax optimization of those private investors. But it's not just the tax credit, but the P&L every year for the building also flows through. So there's big depreciation that goes through, and so the P&L actually operates from a tax point of view at a loss. And those taxable losses flow through to the 99.99% owners. And so it's that bundle of tax benefits, including the taxable loss flow-throughs, that create this incredibly, the only really source of funding in the entire country is via the IRS. This is an IRS code thing. It's not HUD or anything else like that. And that's how and that creates what Margaret said close to the beginning of the financial presentation, which is they're so valuable because you get the money and you don't have to pay it back. Whereas at the hard loan, could be from Dedham Bank, and kind of wants us to pay it back over 30 years.
Maybe we don't.
Yeah, I would know that the government provides tax credit type funding for other types of projects.
Yes.
Not just housing.
No,
That's
that's
correct. They do solar panels.
But I know that this P&L flow through, actually, we haven't been mentioning very often as we go through.
Yeah.
And it's an important component of why Bank of America does this.
But then, so the tax credit LLC will then contract back to the Cambridge Housing Authority as the managing agent. And then Cambridge Housing Authority would subcontract with Needham Housing Authority. That's kind of.
But would they pay, if we do have a sub-management agreement for something, would they pay us? It becomes a cost that is in that P&L. It's all part of what creates the loss that eventually goes through to those ownership entities.
Yeah, and it's really the depreciation of the asset that really drives the cost.
That's right.
The losses. And, when I did a number of deals before the Trump tax credit break happened in 2017, you used to be able to depreciate over a 40-year term, and that would be helpful because you can kind of control how much benefit the investor gets. But then all of a sudden, that rule came in and it changed everything to 30 years. And so we had to go back and look at every one of our projects that had the 40-year term and reevaluate them to see what the 30-year did. So, it is something that you always pay attention to, and it's a kind of hidden, not so hidden benefit that the investor gets. But when we are evaluating our projects in advance of selecting an investor, we're calculating out the value of the actual dollar credit purchase along with the depreciation and determining, what their rate of return is from the entire investment, not only just the purchase of the credits, but that calculation of what the depreciable
Present value.
Yeah.
And if you wake up tomorrow morning and say, wait a minute, Margaret said that some depending on the market, you could get $1.05 value for $1 worth of tax credits. Why would a private sector company pay more than $1 per dollar for the tax credits, you know, wouldn't it always be 85 cents on a dollar or 90? And the answer is, there are these other tax shelter benefits that come, and then there's a supply and demand kind of market.
And then there's the bank piece of the Community Reinvestment Act. So
So there's
sometimes
CRA and affordable housing and fair lending. and all
So-
all of that. So then the banks are very motivated sometimes to get into a deal because they're getting not only the rate of return that they want, they're getting the CRA credits, they're getting, you know, the other things that.
So the Community Reinvestment Act is an obligation that every bank with a federal charter has to invest a certain amount in their local communities. You know, whether it's, you know, Dedham Bank or Needham Bank or, you know, or any, you know, MS&T or anybody, you know.
And then I'll just say, you know, when interest rates are going up, then the banks and then the other entities that invest in tax credits, you know, are gonna demand a higher return. So then equity pricing goes down. And then when interest rates are really low, you know, it kind of flip flops a little bit. So, you know, we're still seeing pricing in the low 90, 92, 93. I've got an offer right now at 94. So it's, you know, but when I closed the first two deals after the Great Recession in 2010, 81 and 83 cents.
That was
So my highest has been $1.14. So, you know, it's, so, you know, we're adjusting the interest rates, we're adjusting the price. I mean, we're, you know, my executive director, you know, when we're going to closing, we're all in kind of frenetic kind of pace and, you know, we're changing the pro forma almost daily or, you know, close to, because we're getting new information, better information. And, you know, you want to reflect that and you want to continue to evaluate to make sure it's the best deal for the project, the best deal for the housing authority long term.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Reg. We've got a lot to sleep on here, and I think we'll probably do a lot of discussing between now and our next meeting, which is the 7th of February. I think we'll probably solicit feedback from Emily as well as the rest of the committee. And we'll have an agenda that will probably match that on the 7th, okay? I don't know if you're available to come back in again if we have a need.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right,
Anytime you
that
let
might be the case.
As you know, and we know, you know, we've got placeholders blocked out for every meeting
Good.
here, you know, for now.
Great, great. All right, any other comment, anyone? All right, well, we thank you, folks.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very well done, well done. We do not have anything else on our agenda, do
We do not.
we? We do not, okay. That concludes tonight's presentation.
Tonight's entertaining.
That's right.
So do we need a motion to?
We do.
I move we adjourn.
Okay, that was second, okay, any discussion? All right, by a voice vote,
You have to do it.
Reg Foster,
Aye.
Laura,
Yes.
Jim? Jean,
Aye.
Dave? Maureen?
Hi.
Aye, and the chair votes aye as well. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Ladies and
Ready?
gentlemen, thank you and for the support that you've given to us, because we couldn't do what we're doing without you. Thank you.
Happy to do it.
Their interest.
Thank you guys for coming.